I'm not gonna get the microphone working. We had some installers come, and they obviously pulled out the connector wire behind here. And that's, the microphone doesn't sync to the system, so just the microphone's up there, which is what we pretty much always use.
Right, okay.
Sorry about that. You're the first person that's asked for the microphone.
What is it like? Yeah.
I understand you have some soft-spoken people.
Well,
We get those occasionally.
still a real issue though.
Yes, I know it is.
But yeah, okay, so nice loud outdoor voices rather than the microphone apparently. I do apologise. We will go with our shouting to the next rural community voice rather than the sitting in the UN whispering to each other voice. I really don't like seeing a spot on this camera. There's a horrible camera here that every time I see it on screen, it's just picking up. There's not quite enough coverage behind here anymore. I'm glad that transcription being seen to everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you join us from. And welcome to this parallel event at the 67th session of the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women, and of course on International Women's Day here in New York. Before I hand over to ACWW's World President, can I ask please everyone to ensure that you have switched off or switched to silent your mobile phone and other devices. And as this event is being broadcast and the cameras are automated, please be aware that pictures and video are being recorded. Closed captioning is also enabled in the room and online for anyone who would require it. Can I just check in the chat on the meeting online, our guests, you can hear us clearly? If anyone would like to just type us a message to say yes. Wonderful, thank you very much, Lynn McLean. Before we call the meeting to order, ACWW strongly believes that it is important to recognise the historic importance of the land on which we are hosting this meeting in New York and upon which the headquarters of the United Nations stands. The land upon which we gather is part of the traditional territory of the Lenni Lenape, called the Lenapehoking. The Lenape people lived in harmony with one another upon this territory for thousands of years. During the colonial era and early federal period, many were removed east, west, and north, but some also remain among the continuing historical tribal communities of the region. The Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribal nation, the Ramapo Lenape nation, and the Powhatan Lenape nation, the Nanticoke of Millsboro, Delaware, and the Lenape of Cheswell, Delaware. We acknowledge the Lenni Lenape as the original people of this land and their continuing relationship with their territory. In our acknowledgement of the continued presence of these people in their homeland, we affirm the aspiration of the great Lenape chief Tamanend that there be harmony between the indigenous people of this land and the descendants of the immigrants to this land, as long as the rivers and creeks flow and the sun, moon, and stars shine. I'm now pleased to introduce ACWW World President Magdi de Kock, who will start our meeting.
Good afternoon. I am very pleased to welcome you to this CSW 67 parallel event hosted by the Associated Country Women of the World. Greetings to both those in person and those online. I would like to introduce our NGO and share a little bit about myself. My name is Magdi de Kock, and I am a rural woman from the Gauteng province, South Africa. And this is my first time in person at this magnificent event, this gathering of women around the United Nations in New York. The Associated Country Women of the World brings together diverse voices from rural communities to identify pathways to meaningful change, from community action to governmental policy, and to highlight the barriers that must be addressed. ACWW is an association of network of rural women's societies in over 80 countries, whose membership covers more than 9 million rural women. Established 94 years ago, ACWW exists to amplify the voices of rural women so that the problems they face and the solutions they raise are heard and acknowledged by international policymakers and legislators. Rural women are the backbone of families and communities, of nations, but they are often a silent support, adapting to change and tragedy as required. They bear the burden of conflict to go unheard in legislation, and they remain unprotected and unsupported. ACWW exists to change that. Our subject today is rural women as agents of change. In 2018, The UN Commission on the Status of Women recognized the important role and contribution of rural women as critical agents in the eradication of poverty and in enhancing sustainable agricultural and rural development, as well as sustainable fisheries. But what does this look like in real life? What about the social change needed for this to become a reality? To what extent does climate change impact on the agenda for development? How does violence against women impede progress? How can we achieve change without men and boys committing to equality and empowerment? We can note the negative and continuing impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on rural communities globally, and these challenges have compounded existing inequalities in non-urban, peri-urban, rural, coastal, and remote communities. In 2018, we saw the General Assembly adopt the UN Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other people working in rural areas. Yes, indeed, the rights of peasants and other working people in rural areas. This recognized the vital role played by rural communities in global food security, development, and environmental conservation. It is a plan of action for governments to respect, protect, and secure peasants' rights and to effectively regulate transnational corporations to prevent harm. But like so many UN declarations, action has been slow to follow words, and we still see that these communities are balanced precariously on the edge of collapse. It is further problematic that some major nations, Australia, Hungary, Israel, New Zealand, Sweden, United Kingdom, and the United States of America all voted against the declaration and do not support it as agreed language. However, the most significant challenge remaining is the lack of willpower for changing the living conditions of rural women from industrialists, governments, and quasi-governmental scale industrial or economic players. For over a century, the human cost of industrial expansion has been disregarded, and the world has become more polarized and less sustainable. Small-scale farmers and peasants feed around 75% of the world, but they also represent 80% of the world's hungry and 70% of those living in extreme poverty. They are disproportionately exposed to environmental degradation, toxic substances, land evictions, and climate change. Peasants and rural workers suffer from burdens caused by poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. More recently, their situation has been worsened due to the direct effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and its subsequent harmful impact on food and the cost of living crisis. Rural women in low-income countries account for around 49% of the agricultural labor force and around 41% in more developed nations. We believe it is in the interests of every government to invest in the empowerment of rural women and to ensure a human rights framework that provides a basis for education, health, and economic prosperity. The UN Decade of Family Farming draws attention to this, but having been launched in 2019, has already lost much of its momentum. It really is the intersecting and connecting inequalities that are the most harmful. Rural women will suffer the worst living conditions when they are also Indigenous, remote, survivors of domestic and gender-based violence, widows, victims of conflict at either extreme of the life course, disabled, neurodiverse from the LGBT+ community, or when their dispersion across large swaths of land mean their elected representatives are fewer and hold less power than their urban counterparts. Much has already been said this week about solidarity. To this end, I would like to take a moment to consider Article 40 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states, "Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution." Everyone has the right to seek and enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. The 1951 UN Convention relating to the status of refugees elaborates upon this right. It provides an international meaning of refugee, which is a person in another country at risk of persecution in her, his, or their own country. The convention sets out certain basic rights of refugees that are necessary for the enjoyment of asylum. These include the right not to be returned to a place where they are at risk of persecution. It also includes the right not to be penalized for being in or entering a country without permission, where this is necessary for them to seek and receive asylum. In light of announcements by a member state government yesterday, including the intention to breach a series of international laws, please take a moment to consider that we just sit a few hundred yards from the building where negotiations will resume tomorrow, and text aimed to secure human rights, and in which many member states will seek to claim a moral high ground. As civil society organizations, our obligation is to shine the light of honesty and accountability on those dark corners of governments might go unnoticed, and which they seek to hide under the rocks of popularism and media hysteria. Refugees and asylum seekers are not illegal, nor illegal immigrants. They are humans. We must stand together, ensuring access to human rights for all, not just our own constituents. I will now hand over to ACWW's Advocacy Director, Nick Newland, who will introduce our first speaker. Thanks, Nick.
Thank you, Madam World President, and for your poignant reminder that all member states must fulfill their obligations under international law, not only when it's convenient or looks good in the press. I'm now pleased to introduce Minister Natalie Jameson as our keynote speaker and co-host. The Honourable Natalie Jameson was elected as a member of the Legislative Assembly for Prince Edward Island, Canada, in July 2019. She served as the Minister for Education and Lifelong Learning since January 2021, and the Minister responsible for the status of women since February 2020. Minister Jameson's cabinet roles have included Minister for Education, Water and Climate Change, Minister responsible for Charlottetown, member of the PEI Special Committee on Climate Change, member of the PEI Special Committee on Poverty, and the member of the Cabinet Committee on Policy and Priorities. Born and raised in Prince Edward Island, Minister Jameson is an energetic, community-minded, proud mother of 2 young boys. She attended Holland College and the University of Prince Edward Island studying business and tourism. Before entering political life, Mr. Jameson spent several years working in professional roles with a focus in community investment, human resources and accounting. And she is a dedicated volunteer, having left her mark on charities and not-for-profits across Canada, including Women's Shelters, United Way and Ronald McDonald House. As you can see, her experience and priorities align closely with ACWW's global work, and we are honoured to welcome Minister Jameson via a video link today. And I will now hand over to her, hoping that the technology in the room facilitates this. Do bear with me.
It is an absolute pleasure to be with you here today virtually and to have the opportunity to share what we are doing here on Prince Edward Island to create pathways to meaningful change. From community action to governmental policy to supporting women and girls in our province. I want to thank President Magdi, UN Chairperson Marie, and the ACWW organization for partnering with us on today's event. Before I get into my remarks, I want to share a bit about myself. So I grew up on Prince Edward Island, a small province off the east coast of Canada. My parents were teachers. As a young girl, I never aspired to be in politics, but I always had a deep passion for people. I spent many hours volunteering, and I have a heart for humanitarian work. When I ran for politics, it was simply because I wanted to see a change, and I wanted to do everything in my power to support the people in my community and care for their families. Now I have the honor and privilege to be the Minister responsible for the status of women and the Minister of Education and Lifelong Learning for the province of Prince Edward Island. Leading, especially during the times of uncertainty, such as a pandemic, has been extremely challenging, but we have learned so much along the way. These past few years have shown us all how much we need to rely on one another, the importance of good leadership, partnering with the community, and collaboration. Collaboration is something you are going to hear a lot from me today. I have learned that when we work together, we can accomplish so much more than we can on our own. It was through a tremendous amount of collaboration that we showed our resilience. Women and girls were certainly disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. As we have been building back our society, it has been important that we just haven't gone back to the same old ways of doing business. We need to be continuously growing, strengthening supports, and responding to the needs of the most vulnerable. Today, I want to touch on 3 areas in particular, where our province is focusing our efforts to make meaningful change for women. I'm going to share with you about our work to end violence against women, support women in the workforce, and invest with women in mind. The pandemic magnified the existing inequities in our society, with women and equity-seeking communities disproportionately impacted. Over the past 2 years, we have focused on providing emergency supports and fostering economic recovery. In 2022 and 2023, we continued to support the building back of our communities while simultaneously working towards a better plan to address gender inequality in our province and throughout Canada. Living a life free from violence is a fundamental human right, but gender-based violence continues to have a significant barrier to achieving gender equality in Canada. It is one of the most pervasive, deadly, and deeply rooted human rights violations of our time. Federal, provincial, and territorial governments in Canada are committed to preventing and addressing it. Last November, the federal, provincial, and territorial ministers responsible for the status of women from across Canada came together and endorsed a 10-year national action plan to end gender-based violence. The National Action Plan sets a framework for anyone facing gender-based violence to have reliable and timely access to protection and services, no matter where they live. The 5 pillars of the National Action Plan are support for victims, survivors and their families, prevention, responsive justice system, implementing Indigenous-led approaches, and social infrastructure and enabling environment. The National Action Plan was made possible through close collaboration between FPT governments and is informed by engagement with Indigenous partners, victims, survivors, frontline service providers, experts, academics, and advocates. The work to end gender-based violence and achieve gender equality in Canada is far from done. With the backing from our federal partners, our province is now working to support local community projects to end gender-based violence, to provide funding and enhance our crisis hotline supports so people have a safe and reliable place to turn when they are in crisis. And last week, we launched a provincial strategy for preventing and responding to adult sexual violence in Prince Edward Island, creating a culture of care. This is the first strategy of its kind in our province, designed both to prevent sexual violence and improve supports for people impacted by sexual violence. Sexual violence is never okay, and it is heartbreaking that so many individuals are impacted by abuse and violence. We all have a shared responsibility to help end sexual violence in all of its forms, and we are committed to leading this important work for our province. This new strategy will help to create a culture of care in which every member of our society can understand their role in preventing sexual violence. It will also ensure that people who are impacted by sexual violence and communities have access to a coordinated and trauma-informed system of supports and services that acknowledges their individual needs. We want our province and our communities to be safe and welcoming, where women feel heard and supported. Another way we are supporting women and girls is by ensuring that all members of society have equal opportunities for jobs and career advancements. There have been several articles published that talk about the she-cession and the disproportionate economic impact on women over the past 3 years. In addition to their work in the labor market, many women also provide a significant amount of unpaid labor, often due to caregiving responsibilities for aging family members. These additional responsibilities leave women more likely to pursue part-time or seasonal work, which was more precarious, especially throughout the pandemic. We've made significant investments to support people in furthering their education and expanding the workforce. Millions of dollars were invested at the national and provincial levels. But when you look at the bigger picture of women in the workforce, there are two key ideas that I want to highlight. The first is childcare. As a mother of 2 young boys myself, I know that I would not be in this position I am today if I wasn't 100% confident in my childcare. In order for women to work, childcare needs to be available, it needs to be affordable, it needs to be in a safe and secure environment where parents feel comfortable leaving their young children. In Canada, almost every province is working towards an average of $10 a day childcare. Our jurisdiction in Prince Edward Island is a leader in childcare development, and we are co-chairing the National Table on Childcare and Early Learning in Canada. We have created updated criteria for designated early years centres, and we are investing in opening new centres and expanding existing centres every year. We have increased wages for early childhood educators, and we are working with our local post-secondary institutions to offer more opportunities for people to be trained in this field. These are not babysitters. These are the individuals who will care and guide our youngest citizens through play-based learning. We are investing millions of dollars in strengthening our early years sector so women can feel more confident in their decision to enter or re-enter their workforce. I also firmly believe that women can do anything they set their minds to. Gone are the days of gender-based careers. As we move forward, we want to build better, and we want women to have equal employment opportunities. Again, this work is all about collaboration. In Prince Edward Island, we are working with the Department of Economic Growth, Tourism and Culture on new strategies and investments into women in the workforce. We are also investing in community to offer new and innovative ways to expand opportunities for women and girls. STEAM, which stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Maths. STEAM is a tremendous organization which we are working with to allow girls and youth to explore careers in these fields, providing hands-on experiences in fun and unique ways. We are working with organizations and associations where women are typically underrepresented, such as the Construction Association, the Engineering Association, and the Road Builders of PEI. We want to find ways to encourage women to pursue these careers, and we also make sure that the workforce is ready for them. A great example of this was within our own government's procurement policies. Over the past year, we have changed our policy to ensure that any contractor bidding on a government tender is now required to follow the Public Services Commission's HR policy for the prevention and resolution of harassment in the workplace. We have also moved legislation to ensure our post-secondary institutions have regular updated harassment policies in place to protect students and staff. We invest annually into the PEI Women's Network to offer a Trade Horizons program where women are exposed to trades and technology careers. Participants experience hands-on learning opportunities, mentorship, and tours with industry employers. Again, this is all being done in collaborations. Governments working with NGOs, working with post-secondary institutions, working with industry, and at the end of the day, providing more opportunities for women and girls. The current fiscal climate and the past few years of uncertainty have really forced us to look at the world differently and how we do things. In Prince Edward Island, we also took this as an opportunity to look deeper into how we are investing in women. Last year, for the first time ever, a gender and diversity lens was applied to the provincial operating budget throughout the planning process. This means that our Interministerial Women's Secretariat was given the opportunity to provide input and recommendations for every government department on how their investments may impact women, as well as the broader scope of gender and diversity. Because of this, we are seeing more and more government departments investing in areas that will move the marker on equality in our province. Now is the time for us as women to stand up and be heard. Now is the time for us as leaders to really make a difference, to be innovative and provide for the needs of all women and girls in our communities and around the globe. As I said at the beginning, I entered into politics because I have a real heart for people and for making lasting change for the betterment of all. I truly believe that we can make that change if we collaborate and work together, if we listen to the people we are working for, and be open to the new and innovative ideas. I want to thank you all again for being here today. I'm honored to be part of this tremendous panel of presenters. As leaders, we need to be open to change. As a society, we need to continue to evolve and adapt to make our world a better place. As we move forward, we need to do better and not go back to the same old ways. I hope you leave today's event inspired and challenged to make a difference for women and girls in your community. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Minister Jameson, for your continued collaboration and today's contribution. I'd also like to take a moment to acknowledge Michelle Harris-Gange and Dawn Wilson from the Canadian delegation in the Minister's office who join us today in person. Thank you for being with us. From the chilly north to the warm south, we now welcome Claire Williamson, Rural Women New Zealand board member from the North Island. Rural Women New Zealand seeks to empower rural women and girls by nurturing their talents and encouraging members to develop their skills through leadership roles within branches and provincials. In addition, RWNZ provides both a social and business networking opportunity for members, and by developing groundbreaking research and advocacy programs, ensure that governmental collaboration sets the standard to which many aspire. Claire Williamson helps tell the story of rural women New Zealand, particularly in the online space, and encourages the next generation of younger members. She has a wide range of governance experience in not-for-profits, sport, and business, and is well known for putting stakeholders' needs at the forefront and communicating an organisation's vision effectively. As long-term ACWW members, Rural Women New Zealand are frequent collaborators with ACWW at CSW and at the UN, including a major collaboration in 2018 when rural women were the priority theme. So Claire, I'm absolutely delighted to hand over the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Nick. And it's a real privilege to be involved today and to speak about what rural women do. I must apologise, I have a wee bit of a tickle in my throat, so hopefully my voice comes through okay. So today I just want to talk a little bit about what Rural Women New Zealand do, how we fit into, I suppose, the global support of women and children. Our Our mantra is strengthening, supporting and connecting women and children to be empowered members of their communities. So as we know, and as Minister Jamieson has mentioned, women are an integral part of the community. Strengthening the ability of women to function and be successful within those communities is key for us. So it's our belief that when women are activated and empowered, the whole community benefits, and that they often do the majority of the work at home with the family and children. So this spills over to the community as a whole. I want to talk a little bit about how rural women support business, entrepreneurship and leadership in the rural space. We support rurally based female entrepreneurs to upskill, to get their businesses out into the marketplace and provide support for all parts of that process as well. So with marketing, with sales, with connecting with other spaces. Our yearly business awards celebrate success for rural women, and our activator program is all about getting young and new rural entrepreneurs into the places they need to go and provide opportunities to grow and celebrate that success. We also run leadership programs at a national and regional level to support our members in growing their skills and connecting with others. We also have a voice in terms of our representation on groups in New Zealand. We've got some big health reforms going on at the moment. We've got challenges with adverse events and significant flooding in many areas of our country. And we've also got developments in education. So we have a really big importance on advocacy, on providing submissions into policy work and lending our voice to issues that matter in health, education and technology. I also want to talk a little bit about climate change and adverse events and how that fits into what we do. As with everything, it's vitally important to include women's voices in creating solutions to combat climate change. In New Zealand, we've got an organisation that's just being developed, Girls Who Grow, who are an organisation encouraging younger women to go into careers in agriculture. And interestingly, actually, educating women and girls is number 6 out of 100 in the most effective climate change solutions. So this is a big influence in educating women and girls. It's recognised as a really strong reason for getting these groups together and supporting women into agriculture. Greater involvement of women in local decision making leads to better natural resource management and conservation outcomes. So in building leadership opportunities within our communities is key, and also is encouraging more of our women to take careers into the local and national government space. Adverse events in New Zealand are currently challenging our food security somewhat, and this is the case globally as well, and our ability to produce the food we're known for, being a big food producing country. So I'll talk a little bit about some recent flooding events that have wiped out a lot of our crops in the North Island, but also created a real opportunity for us as rural women to support those communities that are being affected. Something I have a special interest in at Rural Women New Zealand is the technology space, and we use this for work and education, entertainment, communicating and connecting. Unfortunately, things like high-speed internet is not available everywhere in our country. So for things like social media, live streams, movies, and some ways of connecting. So even this, what we're doing today, is not available for people to watch in some rural areas here in New Zealand. The majority of what's missing is in those rural areas, and we have had recent commitment from our government to fund more connectivity into our rural areas and get more of these users online. So that's the first step in achieving that equality between our urban and rural counterparts. So we kind of refer to this as technology poverty, and the fact that rural and urban don't have that same access. In rural right now in New Zealand, there is a big cost factor of receiving that higher speed internet and whether technology is available at all. And those solutions are pretty expensive as well. We've also got challenges with our older people, with younger people as well, and obviously women. It's pleasing to see this gap shortening, but it's also the same offering. Until it's the same offering for everyone, it will hold women back, our rural women in business, education, health, and other careers. This is important across a lot of our of our country, because we are such a rurally based country. We have a lot of business involved with agriculture and not only agricultural businesses where they're producing food, but also the surrounding businesses as well. So having that technology aspect growing over time is really important for us. Technology and machinery development in the rural space in New Zealand has actually prompted new roles for women, which is great. These roles might have been traditionally grunt work roles that were performed by men. And to sort of, I suppose, to show this, our recent Dairy Awards had 6 out of 9 winners who were actually female, which is great to see. More are taking senior roles within the sector and in governance positions, but we do still have quite a long way to go in achieving equity in this industry. What it's like to be a woman growing up in New Zealand and what challenges we have, I thought I'd pull on my personal experience somewhat. I grew up on the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand on a sheep and beef farm, producing meat and wool. And we didn't have internet connectivity or cell phone reception, and we still didn't have a very good version of this when we left in 2020, so only 3 years ago. So these disparities do create that inequity between rural and urban in New Zealand. So how to achieve change, that's part of what we're talking about today. And at Rural Women New Zealand, to achieve change, I echo what Minister Jamieson said before, and that banding together is key. We need more voices on issues around women's health in our country and the needs of the community, as there are still some pretty big challenges. We have had some successes though, and at Rural Women, we have raised over $25,000 in significant funds for women's reproductive health, and it proves what we can do when we access our networks and spread the word. Women working together and supporting each other creates group strength. Something we see, interestingly, in New Zealand is this is true across political parties. The women in Parliament support each other, and in terms of being women in politics, rather than taking that slightly more adversarial role. And I suspect that might be something that happens in some other places in the world as well. We've also now got just over 50-50 representation in New Zealand's Parliament as of the end of November 2022. And we had the majority of women members for the first time ever. So rural women are resilient. We have seen this demonstrated in the most recent floods that we've had in the North Island of New Zealand earlier this year, and how the rest of the country was able to band together to help with financial aid and practical assistance. Technology and satellite internet have played a big part in the adverse events response as well. And just, I suppose, when you are in that rural area, you always need to plan and think about what services you have near you, and then when those services disappear, it can become really difficult. So being self-sufficient and able to look after yourself, and particularly in those rural areas, very resilient. In New Zealand as well, there is a real push for mental health and wellbeing support, something that we're running in our regions at Rural Women New Zealand to support our rural women with techniques and ways of doing things to support their communities and better mental health outcomes. Overall, at Rural Women New Zealand, we're here to strengthen, support and connect. I really appreciate being involved in this panel today, joining a lovely, wonderful panel of women from around the world, and I look forward to hearing what other people have to say and how we can create rural women as agents of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire, for joining us today remotely. And as will be testified for the first time in quite a while, we've managed to organise a collaboration with Rural Women New Zealand where their participants haven't had to get up at 4 a.m. So it's wonderful to have had an almost sensible time of day. We now head northwest in our journey, not too far. And I have the very great pleasure of welcoming our first in-person speaker, June Oscar, AO, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner from Australia. A proud Bunuba woman, Commissioner Oscar is a strong advocate for Indigenous Australian languages, social justice, women's issues, and has worked tirelessly to reduce fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. She has held a raft of influential positions, including Deputy Director of the Kimberley Land Council, Chair of the Kimberley Language Resource Centre, and the Kimberley Interpreting Service. In 2013, she was awarded an Officer of the Order of Australia for distinguished service to the Indigenous community of Western Australia, particularly through health and social welfare programs. In 2015, she received the Menzies School of Health Research Medallion for her work with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, and in 2016 was the recipient of the Desmond Tutu Global Reconciliation Award and was named NAIDOC Person of the Year in 2018, and in 2019 was bestowed the honorary role of a Distinguished Fellow of ANZSOG. She began her 5-year term as Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner in 2017, and in April 2022, she was reappointed for a further 2 years. She published the landmark Wiyani Tangani Women's Voices report in December 2020 and continues to pursue its full implementation to advance First Nations gender justice and equality in Australia. Commissioner Oscar, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you to ACWW for bringing us all together today, and happy International Women's Day to everyone present and those online. Thank you to our previous speakers, and I wish to pay special acknowledgement to Senator Mullindiri McCarthy, who's the head of the Australian delegation to CSW 67, the first time ever a First Nations woman has led the Australian delegation to the UN. So I think that's worth a special mention. Jalumurulangu, Wiyana Bramayane. So good day, ladies and gentlemen, in my Bonobo language. And it is a tradition for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples from Australia to open meetings and engagements by acknowledging the name, the place of the country we stand on. The vast continent of Australia is home to around 250 First Nations and our respective traditional countries and our languages, which creates our internal borders from each other. From these countries, 250 languages and 800 dialects speak to the unique places in which they come from. We talk about languages as living, as the country talking to us and with us. So my people are the Bonobo, and we come from Bonobo country and we speak the Bonobo language. My home is in a remote region in far north Western Australia. So some 2,000 kilometres from the state's capital city, Perth. I think it is apt to begin in this way today to acknowledge the lands we stand on and the thousands of generations of Indigenous peoples that have been the custodian for the lands and waters we all call home. Not very long ago, New York was free of buildings and pavements and had its own unique natural habitat that the Lenape Hoki lived within. The habitat is still there. It still exists beneath our feet. And I pay our collective respects to their people. The other reason why it is important to acknowledge country, particularly on International Women's Day and at this event, is because of so many women like me who come from rural and very remote areas and who continue to speak for and protect our traditional lands and waterways. We talk about our ancestors as the first mothers to walk the earth, the first mothers with their digging sticks to turn the soil of our continent, to nourish the soil, the plants and animals, and thousands of generations of children. Indigenous women and women from rural regions across the globe speak up for the places they come from, reminding us of their connections to place, of the importance of those places, which we far too frequently refer to as the margins. Rural women of the world have vibrant lives that are diverse and unique and often function very differently to the mainstream. I know from my own experiences how Indigenous women in remote regions carry deep ancestral knowledges about how to maintain healthy families, societies, and ecosystems. We have intimate knowledge about childbirth and child rearing, nutrition, plants and medicines, and ways of engaging that is conflict adverse and pacifying to help in effective community decision-making. We also understand and work the land. Indigenous women know how to gather natural resources in the right seasons, and in many parts of the world can increase the yield of natural resources. Through all the work, roles and responsibilities of women, we are knitting the fabric of our societies together. Indigenous women and rural women who carry such intimate knowledges of place and people and care for so many, the young and the senior, are critical to the flourishing of life. Despite this, I know we are one of the least recognized groups and underutilized knowledge holders for contributing to significant local and global change to create more sustainable and healthy societies. So that is why when I was appointed to the position of Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commissioner at the Australian Human Rights Commission, Australia's peak human rights institution, the first woman in 25 years appointed to this role, I was absolutely committed to elevating the voices, knowledges, and lives of First Nations women, many of whom occupy the remote and rural regions of Australia. I launched the We Yaniyu Dangani project, good effort, Nick.
Apologies.
Meaning women's voices or voices belonging to women in my language. So we is woman, We Yani is a collective of women, and Udangani means the voices of that collective. The project was the first of its kind in 34 years in my country, believe it or not, to consult with First Nations women as a collective on our own terms. I spoke to over 2,000 Indigenous women and girls nationwide in 2018, which resulted in a landmark comprehensive report on the rights and lives of First Nations women and girls in Australia. This report was tabled in Australia's federal parliament in December 2020. But the work did not end with a report, and neither should it, because I did not want our women's lives to be confined to gathering dust on a shelf. Since then, we have ensured all governments are aware of the findings, and we have taken the report back to women in all of the regions of Australia, including remote areas, so that they can use it as a tool to leverage for their advocacy for change. From these ongoing conversations, we developed an implementation framework that translates the findings of this report into priorities and actions. And this May, we are hosting the first ever National Indigenous Women's Summit in Australia, bringing many of our Indigenous women together from remote and rural regions with women from urban centres. This has all been supported by the Australian government. Post the summit, we will develop an Indigenous Women's National Framework for Action to look at how we can achieve sustained structural change for First Nations gender justice and equality in Australia. This has not happened ever in my country. And we are also establishing a First Nations Gender Justice Institute at our national university, at the Australian National University. I raise this work with you all because I think it is central to many of our aims and ambitions to take women and their knowledge from the so-called margins and put them at the heart of policy making and structural reform agendas. The overall findings of We Yaniyu Dangani proves that when we invest in women, we are investing in the health and well-being of all people. This work shows, as doers, other research, as does other research, I beg your pardon, that Indigenous and rural women are at the front line of environmental, social, and economic change work. Women are the doers and connectors of everything. They are food producers, managing and caring for land, ensuring children have access to nutritious food, medicines, and education. And they are often running small businesses in communities or are behind the decisions made about localised trade and production. Far from women and their lives occupying trivial and marginal spaces, the issues they deal with and the way they live at a local level matters to us all globally. The problem is very little of what they do is recognised or supported by broader systems. So rather than tapping into what our women know and utilising it to confront some of our gravest challenges, like climate change, current structures further excludes women from decision-making, causing adverse short and long-term impacts to so many. That's the truth. We found through We Yaniyu Dangani, which is consistent with many other calls for action, that we have to improve the pathways and mechanisms for our structurally most marginalised women to be at the table in all decision-making arenas, and that we design the table and what that looks like. I want to finish here where I began. When we elevate the voices of women from rural places and spaces across the globe, it opens worlds to us and connects us to vibrant knowledge systems and ways of being that are not present in the mainstream. We must support the lives of women in the places they live and work, because their connections, languages, and knowledges can enhance life for us all. Yanija, thank you, and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Oscar, for joining us today and for that really important message and connecting back so many of the themes that we discussed with the real incredible importance of respect for Indigenous language as the core of our humanity. So, from the South Pacific, we came from the North Atlantic. Now from the South Pacific, we head to East Africa, and I am pleased to introduce Judith Juma from the Social Justice League in Kenya and part of ACWW's delegation at CSW this year. Together with a team of lawyers who are advocates of the High Court of Kenya, Judith runs a community-based organization that is primarily based in Homa Bay County in the western region of Kenya. And the Social Justice League holds government accountability and the rights and lives of women at its core. Her work focuses on the implementation of legislation on gender democracy, advocacy for sexual and reproductive health and rights, strategic litigation, policy, and research on equality. Judith, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Nick. Thank you so much, ACWW. I'm so happy about the issues that have been raised by the speakers before me, that the issues that women face around the world are common, yet not similar, but are common in nature. It is quite an honor to speak on the role of women as agents of change on the occasion that is globally celebrated as the International Women's Day. In that regard, I must begin by officially declaring for all women and girls around the world, Happy International Women's Day. Or as I would say in Swahili, Kila la heri ya siku ya wanawake wote duniani. The current conversation has allowed us to leverage on digital technology and broadcast this event to the world. As a result, I wish to declare Happy International Women's Day to the Indigenous women listening to this conversation in my local language. And I say, Odiochieng mamor, marmine epinduto. Ladies and gentlemen, as I was looking for the translation to my local language, I must point out that I was impressed to learn that both Swahili and my mother tongue Luo emphasize on all women as part of saying Happy International Women's Day. That is to say, my local language emphasizes that we should say Happy International Women's Day to all women. What that means is that the advocacy efforts leading to the recognition of this day includes all women, irrespective of their race and other intersecting and marginalized identities. The current review theme of CSW 67 requires us to look back on CSW 62 and move forward with less talk and more action for rural women as agents of change. The agreed conclusion of CSW 62 came out of a priority theme that recognized the important conversations requiring the attention of the world in empowering rural women and girls. The UN Commission at the time summarized its agreed conclusions on 3 thematic areas requiring the urgent action of governments and other stakeholders. Briefly, these were to strengthen normative, legal, and policy frameworks, to implement economic and social policies for the empowerment of all rural women and girls, and thirdly, to strengthen the collective voice, leadership, and decision-making of all rural women and girls. Barely 2 years after these agreed conclusions was the world hit by a pandemic that deepened inequalities that were already there, frustrated policy implementation, and locked down the world. What this meant was that COVID-19 created higher levels of social, economic divides and shifted national and international priorities for the allocation of resources. For rural women and girls, social, economic, political, and technological inequalities that they were facing before the pandemic stretched beyond their imagination because of COVID-19. By the time the world adjusted to the new normal, rural women and girls were either left behind, catching up late by themselves, and in other cases, by the help of their governments and civil society in setting COVID-19 resilient structures. In most cases, penetration of government structures failed to reach rural areas. Rural women have been the drivers of our economies, and I say so because rural women support their households and communities in achieving food security, generating income, and improving rural and urban livelihoods. It is because of the agricultural produce by rural women that the world can boast of the subject of sustainable agricultural development. In essence, rural women are not just agents of change, they are the change we see in the world today. Yet, they are the least to benefit from this produce once it penetrates national and international markets. In addition, women are less likely to be landowners or decision makers in their own space compared to their male counterpart, yet women feed nations using the same land they are denied ownership. COVID-19 merely exposed the devastating impact of already existing inequalities faced by women in general and rural women. As an organization that focuses on social justice in rural Kenya, the Social Justice League witnessed the social injustices faced by rural women firsthand and felt the urgent need to map priority areas which we realize are common to women around the world. These include sexual and reproductive health and rights challenges, lack of formal education, and a high percentage of rural communities living in abject poverty. In addition, rural women in Kenya experienced the negative effects of climate change on agriculture, thus frustrating their main source of livelihood. And I've just picked a few examples. As the world tries to adjust post-COVID-19, we are now alive to the worrying levels that inequalities can reach and the impact of these inequalities on rural women and girls. This therefore calls on us in our respective countries to create emphasis on the expansion of the space for rural women led by civil society organizations or governments and other networks to advance leadership and participation for rural women in decision-making. To focus on gender-responsive policies in social, economic, political, and digital spaces that consider the distinct and acute risks faced by many Indigenous and rural women. And I emphasize on the word distinct because the challenges faced by urban women are not necessarily similar to those faced by rural women. Governments must boost and prioritize the sectors penetrated by rural and Indigenous women, such as agriculture, education, employment, and health. Governments must also intentionally build the capacity of their line ministries and community leaders. And I'm happy that we have a commissioner in the room as gender focal points in supporting gender responsive capacity building programs that include rural women. Rural women must have equal access to digital financial technology that is user and age friendly to sell their produce and gain access to national and international markets. As we look at the review theme of CSW 62, it should connect to the priority theme of CSW 67. In conclusion, as we look at the role of women as agents of change, we must consider past inequalities, learn from the negative effects of COVID-19, and propose solutions for a better future for all rural women and girls around the world. Thank you so much for listening to me. Happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, Judith, for joining us today and being with us this week in New York. We now continue our journey. We follow the path of pastoralists northeast to the Hov province of Mongolia. There we meet our next speaker, Tograg Yubanerden, Director of the Santus Development Bridge NGO. A long-term partner and member of ACWW, Erden and Santus have found countless innovative and inspiring approaches to the empowerment of women from more than 16 Indigenous ethnic groups across the region. We are pleased that in the 2022 ACWW and Santus were awarded $14,000 from the UNESCO Participation Programme to carry out a Rural Women's Empowerment Summit in Hov working with 300 women from nomadic communities, survivors of domestic violence and gender-based violence, and the local slums or townships surrounding the region. This will take place in August this year, and we are grateful to UNESCO, as well as the Mongolian and UK National Commissions, for their support of this project. Before I hand the floor to I'd like to welcome Maria Grazia Squicciarini, Chief of the Executive Office and Director of Division for Social Policies in AI in the Social and Human Sciences sector at UNESCO, who's joining us in person. So welcome. The opportunity to bring some of our members to New York for the first time is a wonderful opportunity for ACWW, and it's a new way of working in our advocacy work. It's a real change in policy, but also a change in our ability to represent and give that opportunity for amplification of our members' voices. We don't seek to give rural women a voice, we seek to make sure people hear theirs. So I'm delighted now to hand the floor to Erden, and I will bring your PowerPoint up.
Thank you, Nick. Hello, my name is Orwell from Mongolia, Hot Province. And happy International Women's Day to all women. And there are 21 provinces in Mongolia, and the western region of Mongolia consists of Hot and Bayudri provinces and have most of indigenous people. And our NGO name is Santos Development Bridge. And our NGO was created in 2005 and has been implementing poverty reduction, income generation, protect women and girls' rights, disability rights, agriculture development, health education, tradition and cultural preservation of indigenous people, humanitarian aid, conservation of threatened animal species, projects for 18 years among rural indigenous people who live in the western region of Mongolia. And here I would like to talk about domestic violence situation in Mongolia. Domestic violence in Mongolia is increasingly recognized as a significant problem. Unfortunately, the long tradition of male dominance is now evidenced as violence in the family, and the majority of the victims are women. Victims of the domestic violence don't inform the police, and this issue is hidden in the Mongolian society. In response, in 2014, the government of Mongolia brought in the law on combating domestic violence, and its amendment came into force in February 2017. While important steps continue to be taken, significant challenges remain. Despite the law, first responders and other justice sector actors have not always been responsive to the problem, particularly due to the limited understanding of domestic violence characteristics. Coordination is inadequate, and survivors are often encouraged at various stages of criminal proceeding to reconcile with their abusers. A violent relationship exists in 1 out of 3 families in Mongolia, that for every 3 women, 1 suffers from a physical violence, and 1 out of 2 children and 1 out of 4 elders are victims of violence. The risks increase if the treatment force knows that the woman is trying to seek help from people or the police. That person, some women cannot tell anyone about the violence and live for a long time under that pressure. They are not aware of the different laws. Some of them don't know it is a crime. It is kept secret, and others don't realize someone is experiencing such violence. If people know that they are under the violence, they don't know what to do. The violence is linked to the social conditions such as the poverty, unemployment, and alcoholism. In other words, they are dependent on each other. Response for domestic violence, we are doing the implementing next activities. First, making some research and collecting some quantitative and qualitative data information. Second, organizing some awareness raising and advocacy activities about women's rights, harmful effects of domestic violence, alcoholism, and about law on combating domestic violence among community people. Three, providing victims of domestic violence with security, medical care, psychological, social welfare, child protection, legal assistance, and mediation services. Fourth, organizing some behavioral trainings and some advocacy work for perpetrators of domestic violence. Fifth, improving joint teams activities and victims' shelter safety. Sixth, monitoring for cases and crimes of domestic violence solved through local court. Seventh, improving participation of men and boys for combating domestic violence. And here, next, I would like to talk about poverty and unemployment. Many people lost their income and job because of COVID-19. Many Mongolian families, Uryanka and Tuva from Ayurvedic provinces, are moving to Holt provincial center. Also, many families are coming from Obyaltai and countryside homes to provincial center, Charlton. Internal economic migrants are moving from rural areas into the cities. The cities are becoming overcrowded. Poverty and unemployment rates are increasing. ACWW funded projects are addressing these issues. Every year, nomadic herders, indigenous people lose their livestock for snow. It caused drought disaster in Mongolia in hard winter and springtime. This is extreme snow and storms which takes many lives every year. If they lose all their livestock, they have no way to move to the provincial center looking for another income resources. That's why poverty and unemployment rate is increasing every year. According to the National Statistics Office, the national unemployment rate exceeded 8.1%, ranking first among developing Asian countries. It is important to improve the poorest families' income and reduce the unemployment rate within the community. 85% of the victims of domestic violence are unemployed, no income sources. Associated Country Women of the World, ACWW, finds 4 different kinds of projects to economically empower rural indigenous women who live in Holt province. First project is a greenhouse agriculture development project. Through this project, we improve the knowledge of the focus members, 40 low-income female-headed women through greenhouse planting trainings and financial accounting organizational structure, small business operations within 5 months of the start of the projects, improved the focus members' capacity through the creation of greenhouses. Within 10 months, the group's members' income increased from access to new markets, better business operation, increased production in 40 families' food consumption. Here, I would like to show you some pictures of the project beneficiaries. Second and third project was Women's Economic Empowerment Project 1 and 2. Through this project, we improved the knowledge of the 8 groups members, 80 low-income and female-headed women with some disabled children. And we created 4 different kinds of groups: goods making, pet product, national tailoring, and bakery groups. We involved them capacity improvement trainings, basic health education trainings, and improved their families' incomes. Here, tailoring group members and products. They are sewing mostly Mongolian national clothes, earning income. And next is boots making group. They are producing some warm boots for the nomadic herders. And next is pet product group. And they are producing pet slippers, souvenirs, different kind of products. These products, raw materials are from the livestock and sheep and lamb wool. And next is bakery group. They are producing mostly national pastries. And so we could improve their family's income in certain amounts. And next, last project is economic empowerment of domestic violence victims project. We have identified 4 types of domestic violence: physical, emotional, economic, and psychological. Through this project, we could improve 100 households, 100 women who are victims of domestic violence and survivors. And we purchased and distributed 8 kinds of vegetable seeds, 3 kinds of small hand tools, and we divided 100 women for 5 groups. And after receiving vegetable seeds and hand tools, 100 women started planting vegetables. In August and September of 2021, they harvested some vegetables and sold 80% of the vegetables and conserving 20% of the vegetables. And 100 families could improve their family's income and their food usage. Yeah. And productivity has increased as well as the variety of foods their 5 groups have produced, and they are becoming more competitive. And 1 member monthly salary benefit became 300,000 tukruk till 400,000 tukruk for 5 groups. And before they had no income. And besides the benefit for the children from the children from the government. And this project has addressed the following sustainable development goals, is contributing for sustainable development goals. And here are some pictures of the beneficiaries. And watermelon is brand product of our province. And here I would like to share case study of 1 victim and beneficiary of our last project. A is a 38-year-old woman who lives with her 4 children in Bogotbak of Charleston of the Hot Province. And this woman has lived with severe family violence for 20 years, since 2000. During this time, she lived in rural Tucson, herding livestock, experiencing economic violence without the power to dispose of the family's property and to buy basic necessities. She was sexually abused because her husband indulged his sexual desires in an immoral way. She was emotionally abused because she was forbidden to see her friends, relatives, and she was physically abused because she was constantly beaten with her husband. She divorced in January 2022. Her relatives asked our NGO for help. Our NGO provided mediation services, connected her with an experienced female lawyer, convened a joint team for the protection of victims of torture, and placed the woman victim and her children in the victim shelter of the department, family, youth, and child department. As a woman victim, without a specific job, professional income, it was really difficult to support her 4 children in a single mother. So she asked help from our NGO. We involved them. We involved her economic empowerment domestic violence victims project funded by ECW, and the victim woman participated in growing vegetable, different kind of step trainings, learned how to plant, grow, care, pickle, and preserve various vegetables trainings. And after that, received 8 kinds of seeds and 3 types of hand tools, and started planting vegetables in May of 2022. And in August and September 2022, harvested some vegetables and sold 70% of the vegetables and conserved 30% of the vegetables, and were pickled and selling. By participating in this project, this woman worked as a team with other women who are victims and survivors of domestic violence, shared their experiences, gave advice to other women victims on how to overcome domestic violence, shared their feelings, became a group, and increased their household income and food supply. Now she is a proof of competence to continue living and expand her small family business. In April 2023, she's planning to start planting vegetables again together with the women of the project group, harvest in August and September. And she will participate in Harvest Festival to be held during the Women's Economic Empowerment Summit. It will be organized in August of 2023, funded by UNESCO. And at the end, I would like to say, let's protect the rights of the victims of domestic violence from the behind the closed doors.
Thank you so much for that really important message. And we look forward to working with you and continuing our collaborations as we move forward. Those of you looking at the time and your schedule for other events will see we are approaching our end. Our venue, the Baha'i International Community, have very kindly granted us a few extra minutes. So I'm very pleased now to hand over to Angela McLeod, who's joining us online. A long-term ACWW member and collaborator, she's held several civil society organisation roles around New Zealand, including previous positions with Business and Professional Women International. She spent time working in Parliament and has now moved her own work into leadership in the political space, and is a current Upper Hutt City Councillor, chair of both the Wellington Regional Waste Forum and the Upper Hutt Community Grants Committee. She grew up on a farm, has a Bachelor of Agriculture and a postgraduate diploma in Development Studies, and is passionate about healthy and sustainable living. A strong advocate for the empowerment of women, community development, and sensible agriculture, Angela has campaigned for equal pay, flexible work legislation, country of origin labelling of food, alcohol law reform, and reducing the rates of violence against women. Angela, you have the floor, and welcome.
Kia ora. Kia ora tātou, ko Angela McLeod taku ingoa, ata Mārie. So I'll be very quick, I promise. And I think that what I wanted to say is that rural women have been agents of change for a very long time. They have done this, or we have done this quietly behind the scenes. We have done this in the forefront in the absence of men, but also for the lucky few in partnership with men. And it's because we care about our land and our people. But what I wanted to talk about today, being an agent of change, is actually part of that being an agent of change is being able to influence the decision makers. And that is about providing evidence, lived experience, and stories. Because after all, everybody learns and takes in information and requests for change in different ways. So you have to meet them, the decision makers, where they make the decisions, if you understand what I'm saying, at a personality level. So one of the evidence of this is when I started a new role with a civil society and was asked to write a press release about equal pay. And I said, well, okay, then what is our policy on that? Well, there wasn't any. So what I did was then realize that I needed to build up that policy, that evidence-based, from surveys with members and other like-minded organizations to come up with, you know, the evidence to be able to back the messages that we were sending, the influence that we wanted to do with decision makers, and because, you know, we needed to have an authoritative voice, and you can't do that without evidence. One of the interesting of my journey, I started in the 1990s campaigning for rural women. Back then, the discussion was around the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and it was about, you know, the plight of rural women with free trade, and actually it should really be fair trade. But now we're talking about access poverty. We don't have access to health, education, or the digital connectivity that we need in order to be able to transact our lives. And what happened for us here in New Zealand and in my local community was the fact that through the lockdown period and COVID, children couldn't do learning because they didn't have access to the internet. Rural women and rural businesses couldn't pay their bills because they didn't have access didn't have access to the internet. So what happened locally was they started saying, see, so Upper Hutt is about, I don't know what it is in miles, but we're about 45 kilometres from the capital city, Wellington. So a lot of our people work in government. We're kind of like a commuter city or a commuter suburb of Wellington. And so a lot of these people in lockdown were trying to work from home and couldn't. And there was a lot of discussion, a lot of chatter amongst the local community, you know, on social media about those that could access it, about this lack of internet. And so as a city councillor, I started looking at what we might be able to do for each other and what the council might be able to do. Interestingly, in New Zealand, city councils don't own or have access to the digital infrastructure. So we don't have access to cell phone towers or satellites or anything like that. However, we can advocate for our people. So what I did, because there seemed to be a lack of understanding of what I was trying to say, because it was anecdotal, is I called for a notice of motion, which is, in the parliamentary sense, it's a resolution or a remit, for the Upper Hutt City Council to survey its rural members, rural residents, to find out exactly what it is that their issue was around internet. The data was reported towards the end of last year, and there's nearly 80% of rural residents in Upper Hutt don't have access to the internet they need to transact their lives. You know, this is supposedly, I guess, depending on your politics, a first world country, a developed nation. Our challenge, of course, is geography. We have lots of mountains and we're spread out over quite a long distance. So what's happened with that is the survey was done. We've not been able to have the next step of that, but last night, because I finished with being a councillor in October last year, last night I went along to the council meeting and spoke in the public forum and asked for action. And so I said, we now have this data, what are we going to do with it? What is the council going to do with it? We actually need to do something, because we can't carry on leaving our rural population in limbo. And so essentially what I'm now going to do, and really happy to share this with you further along in the journey is work with and build a campaign to ask the council to actually advocate for rural Upper Hutt in getting some digital infrastructure. One of the things that we do need to do is we need councils to start understanding that digital infrastructure is as important as roads, footpaths and streetlights. It's as important as the rubbish collection. It is garbage collection. It is as important as the swimming pools, the parks and reserves. And so there you go. That is a little story about how we can start to influence the decision makers. What I will be doing with the campaign is building a group of people, and we will look at the backgrounds of the councillors, we will look at their personalities, and we will build messaging around that. So there you go, that's nice and quick for you, and kia ora tātou, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Angela, for your contribution as ever, and indeed your timeliness. To conclude our meeting today, I'm very pleased to introduce Marie Kenny, ACWW's United Nations Committee Chairman. Marie was elected in April 2019 and has since served in leading the committee, and I've had the real pleasure over the last 4 years of building ACWW's advocacy program, very closely cooperating with Marie. So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. It's a wonderful opportunity for the past few days to have experienced CSW as part of ACWW's delegation in person for the first time because of the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. I previously had been honored to attend CSW as an NGO representative of the Canadian government delegation, and it has been an inspiring and thought-provoking experience to see what has been achieved since 2018, when our review theme was the priority, and to also reflect on just how much left there is to be done. Our speakers today have touched on critical issues which affect their own communities, but are also global truths and realities. We have been inspired and challenged, and they have challenged us by highlighting the need for meaningful social protection systems, implanting the right to study, to live, and to learn in your own Indigenous language, the need to properly monitoring the laws, rights, and government obligations, and the need to ensure that in each day we are working together, strengthening the collaborative good for all rural women, indeed, for all women globally. I would like to gratefully acknowledge each of our speakers and for the contribution and participation today. Thank you so very much. And I thank each of you who are here in person, as well as those who have joined us online. We are also grateful for the support of the Baja international community and for the warm welcome of hosting us here today. A special thanks to Daniel Perel, Fermois Family, and for their support in this event. In closing, I am struck from my own experience in international development that all the talk, all the great ideas will fail if not backed by meaningful commitments, not just financial investment, but significant and widespread policy change for the empowerment of all women and girls in all their diversity. We see this each year when the negotiations for the agreed conclusions thrash through thousands of words, hundreds of hours, and tens of pages. We need fewer words, more action, and the true recognition of rural women as agents of change. I thank you, everyone. I am pleased for you to be here with us today, and I invite you to enjoy the remainder of this International Women's Day, where we stand together for equality, justice, and human rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marie. Ladies and Yes, ladies, and myself. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We do need to vacate the room to allow for the next group to come in. Please, can I ask you to, you don't have to eat them yourselves, but please do take your refreshments with you and any wrappers so that we leave the room suitable for our next colleagues who are joining us. Thank you those who joined us online, and we will hopefully see you tomorrow.